My golden brother tried to frame me for cheating at my wedding. I exposed him, and he lost everyone. My name's Mark, I'm 26, and if it isn't obvious by now, this Friday I was finally set to put on the dreaded tux and head to the altar. No Hollywood dramatics here, no rain, no swooning music, just me and my fiancée Catherine, who is basically perfect enough for any of those scenes. She's the dream girl, for real. Someone should patent her. Sweet, kind, listens to my random rants about the universe and cats at night. She's pure gold. But, of course, fate decided I didn't need just one perfect person in my life. I also have my golden brother, Chris. Yup, the one who shines so bright that our parents practically see him as a work of art. No exaggeration needed here. Imagine a guy who's constantly radiant, casting a shadow so deep I never see the light. Perfect grades? That's Chris. Sports trophies? Also Chris. The high-powered job and the apartment in the city center? All him, not me. My parents can't go a single conversation without praising his flawlessness. So when I announced the wedding, guess who was the first to make a face like he'd bitten into a lemon? You got it. Mr. Perfect himself. Amazing how one look can kill your joy. Chris wasn't happy for me. It was more like he'd been told he'd be seated in the back corner at my wedding. I noticed right away but decided to shrug it off, hoping he'd just come around. But I was wrong. About a week later, Catherine started acting strange. She avoided eye contact, seemed lost in her thoughts, and honestly, it was nerve-wracking. She's usually open and honest, quick to share anything on her mind. But now, silence and a look of hesitation. When I tried to talk to her, she whispered that everything was fine. But by then, a suspicion had crept in, that my dear brother Chris might have something to do with it. The next day, I happened to stumble across Chris talking on the phone. Well, he wasn't just talking. He was whispering like it was a top-secret Mission Impossible operation. Hiding behind a door, whispering. And I managed to catch enough to make my jaw drop. He said, "She has to know. Yeah, it has to fall apart before the wedding." What? Who's she? And what exactly does he want to fall apart? My heart dropped to my stomach. I thought, okay, Mark, don't freak out yet. Breathe. I needed to figure things out. Before confronting Chris in some epic showdown, I thought I'd talk to Catherine. Maybe it was all just a misunderstanding. I went to her room, knocked, and found her sitting on the edge of the bed, looking as devastated as if she'd just lost her cat. Sad face, lowered eyes, the whole scene screamed world's weight on her shoulders. I sat beside her, looked her in the eye, and gently asked what was wrong. Then, she started to explain. Apparently, Chris had played the White Knight. He'd gone to her, in full superhero mode, whispering and armed with proof. He claimed he'd discovered some scandalous messages between me and a woman named Mia. Seriously, who names these fictional people? Where I was supposedly sending all kinds of inappropriate messages. He actually told her he couldn't bear to watch her become a victim of deception. At that moment, I could feel my blood boiling. He's so brilliant, right? Just genius. I don't even know a Mia, let alone have any flirtatious messages. I grabbed her phone, looked at the messages he had found. They were disturbingly well crafted, like he'd spent time crafting every word with care. But I knew they were fake. It took me about 10 minutes to reassure Catherine that this was complete nonsense. I explained how Chris has always loved playing the hero, even if it meant wrecking someone else's life. And you know what? She believed me. But now, we both had this gnawing thought. If he was willing to go this far with fake messages, what else was he planning? The wedding day arrived. All I wanted was for it to go smoothly, like a calm day at sea. No drama, no surprises, just me, my girl, the waves, the sunset, you get it. But in reality, there was a storm in my mind. The thought of Chris and his brilliant plan loomed like a dark cloud. As guests started to gather, and I stood in the hall pretending nothing was wrong, I saw him, Mr. Perfect himself, Chris, as dashing as ever. I was waiting for this moment. Confronting him would be a piece of cake. We met in the corridor, and I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Chris, I know what you're up to. You tried to ruin my wedding. What's the matter, jealous much?" He didn't even blink. He replied, almost as if he'd rehearsed it. Did you really think I'd let you be happy when I haven't found happiness myself? Chills went down my spine. The guy standing in front of me wasn't my brother anymore. He was a stranger, willing to destroy everything I'd built without a second thought. He was more like a villain from a soap opera, complete with a backup plan if things didn't go his way. Then, while we were glaring daggers at each other, our parents came up, obviously overhearing at least part of our conversation. Mom looked like she'd been hit over the head with a hammer. It was my moment to finally expose Chris for what he'd done, right there, in front of everyone. I looked at Mom, then at Dad, and felt this strange mix of relief and rage. In that second, I knew what I had to do. If Chris wanted to ruin my day, well, now this day would be all about him. The ceremony started. Everything was in place. Flowers, music, all beautiful and festive. Catherine and I exchanged vows, and it seemed like we'd reached the happy ending. But inside, a storm was brewing, and I knew I had to address it. If I didn't say my piece, this day would be spoiled. Not just for me, but for her too. After the vows, I raised my hand, like a student in class, and asked to say a few words. I noticed the surprised faces. Who makes a speech after vows when everyone's ready to drink champagne? But trust me, it was worth it. I began. Dear friends and family, there's something you should all know before we start celebrating. The room went still, like I was about to reveal a dark secret, which, to be fair, I was. My brother Chris, Mr. Perfect himself, who we all thought incapable of any wrongdoing, went out of his way to ruin our wedding day. I paused, scanning the room. People's jaws dropped, eyes wide. Some even glanced at Chris with a smirk, as if thinking, Chris? Nah, he wouldn't. But I kept going, building the suspense. Yes, him. He tried to make Catherine believe I was cheating. He even went so far as to fabricate a conversation with some made-up girl. Here, take a look. I showed them the screenshots Catherine had wisely saved, making sure everyone saw the proof. The room froze. No one doubted it now. It wasn't me trying to slander Golden Boy. He'd done it to himself. With every word, I saw Chris's expression change. At first he had a smug grin, like, go ahead, try it. Then confusion, anger, and eventually panic. I don't know what was going through his mind, but he knew there was no talking his way out of this one. I ended with a clear statement. Chris, you weren't just trying to ruin my day. You showed everyone here what it means to be the perfect brother, who will step on anyone just to feed his ego. Silence fell over the room, the kind where everyone's thinking, is this the guy we all thought was so amazing? Slowly, people started moving away from Chris, like he was toxic. Even his close friends looked at him as if he'd just robbed an old lady in broad daylight. My parents sat there in shock, unable to believe that their golden boy had been so petty and envious. And that's how Chris lost everything he'd worked so hard for. His perfect reputation, his family favorite status, all of it destroyed in one speech.